Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Aneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan says it will always support Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process based on mutual consensus of all stakeholders. Army Chief General Javed Bajwa was discussing the regional security and Afghan peace in a phone call with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He acknowledged Pakistan's continuous efforts for peace in the region and pledged to enhance bilateral relations. Saudi Arabia and European powers have expressed concern of Iran's move to boost uranium enrichment to 60%. A Saudi Foreign Ministry statement said such a move could not be considered part of a peaceful nuclear program. European powers said the decision is contrary to Vienna talks aiming at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. The UN human rights expert says violent acts by Israeli settlers against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank has increased in recent months. In a statement, they said a Palestinian died and 133 were injured in over 770 incidents of violence by the Israeli settlers. They call on the Israeli military and police to investigate and prosecute those responsible for the violent acts. The Russian foreign policy advisor has warned the US against imposing sanctions over the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Separately, a Kremlin spokesman said it's too early to talk about US President Joe Biden's proposal for a summit with his Russian counterpart. India has yet again reported the world's highest coronavirus infections, with over 184,000 people testing positive in a day. Pakistan has registered 135 deaths overnight, the highest in the third wave. More than 4,600 people tested positive in the country since yesterday. Meanwhile, the US has paused the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine over reports of rare blood clots. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while the caseload has crossed 136 million. Now, these were top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Let's start from Pakistan, which says it will always support Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process based on mutual consensus of all stakeholders. Pakistan's Army Chief General Javed Bajwa has discussed the regional security situation in a phone call with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The two discussed matters of mutual interest, including the latest developments in the Afghan peace process. Blinken acknowledged Pakistan's continuous efforts for peace and stability in the region. He also pledged to further enhance bilateral relations. Now, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the US and NATO will leave Afghanistan together. In a joint press conference with Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Blinken said the US will work with NATO on a withdrawal plan. Blinken said it is time for US forces in Afghanistan to come home. Meanwhile, the German defense minister has also said NATO will likely join the US in withdrawing all troops from Afghanistan in September. NATO foreign and defense ministers will discuss the issue at a virtual meeting today. This comes as the Taliban refused to participate in any future peace talks unless all foreign troops leave Afghanistan. Now, Indian troops have arrested 4 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They were detained during a cordon and search operation in the Borgund area of Kulgam district. Witnesses say the police have shifted the civilians to an undisclosed interrogation center. Meanwhile, the occupying forces have launched similar operations in the Pulwama district. Indian forces have killed more than 300 civilians since the revocation of the territory's special status, whereas More than 14,000 people have been arrested, including top Kashmiri leaders. Moving on now, Saudi Arabia and European powers have expressed concern over Iran's move to boost uranium enrichment to 60%. A Saudi Foreign Ministry statement said such a move could not be considered part of a peaceful nuclear program. It also urged Iran to carry out its nuclear program under the supervision of the UN nuclear watchdog. While European powers said Iran's decision is contrary to Vienna talks aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. Earlier, Iran said its decision to boost uranium enrichment to 60% is a response to the sabotage at its key nuclear facility. In an address, President Hassan Rouhani defended Tehran's decision and blamed the attack on Israel. Now, UN human rights experts say violent acts by Israeli settlers against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank has increased in recent months. In a statement, they said a Palestinian died and 133 were injured in over 770 incidents of violence by the Israeli settlers. They call on the Israeli military and police to investigate and prosecute those responsible for the violent act. Nearly 500,000 Israeli settlers live in more than 200 settlements and dozens of unauthorized outposts scattered across the Palestinian territories. Israeli settlements are illegal under international law. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Washington is concerned over the recent buildup of Russian forces on the Ukrainian border. He said this in a meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Brussels. The meeting comes ahead of a conference of all 30 NATO allies to discuss the crisis. In recent weeks, fighting has increased in eastern Ukraine, where government forces are battling Russian-backed separatists. NATO says the number of Russian troops massed on Ukraine's borders is the highest since 2014. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense minister said Russia is preparing to potentially store nuclear weapons in Crimea. He also warned that Moscow can attack Ukraine to ensure water supplies for the annexed peninsula. Now, the U.S. is set to proceed with $23 billion arms sales to the United Arab Emirates. President Joe Biden's administration had paused the deals in January, finalized by former President Donald Trump to review them. The State Department spokesperson said Washington intends to move forward with the sales even as it continues reviewing details. He said the review process also involves consultations with Emirati officials related to the use of the weapons. The deals contained 50 F-35 aircraft, up to 18 UAV systems, and a package of air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions. U.S. President Joe Biden has sent an unofficial delegation to Taiwan in what the White House called a signal of his commitment. Now, this comes despite Beijing's warning to Washington that any such step would be like playing with fire. The delegation comprises former Senator Chris Dodd and former Deputy Secretaries of State Richard Armitage and James Stenberg. The White House termed the move a long-standing bipartisan tradition of U.S. administrations. Meanwhile, China's Taiwan Affairs Office urged Washington to abide by the One China principle. It said Beijing's military combat drills in the Taiwan Strait are necessary to safeguard national security. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has announced the legislative elections in the city will take place in December. In a press conference, Lam said laws will be amended so that inciting voters not to vote will be made illegal. The elections were initially slated to be held last September, but were postponed due to the coronavirus pandemic. Lam was speaking a day ahead of the first reading of draft amendments to various laws in the city's legislature. In March, China announced changes to Hong Kong's electoral system, expanding the number of seats in the legislature. Beijing imposed a national security law on Hong Kong last year and is following it up with a revamp of the electoral process. Now moving to Myanmar, where a bloody paint strike has marked the second day of the traditional New Year holiday. Protesters splashed the red colour on roads to represent the blood of those killed in the demonstrations. In Mandalay, activists marched with signs calling for the release of the ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Moreover, the pro-democracy activists cancelled the usual festivities of the 5-day New Year holiday. Activists say security forces have killed more than 700 people since the military seized power on the 1st of February. Meanwhile, the army has suffered heavy losses in the recent fights against the ethnic armies in the north. The Kachin Independence Army claims it has captured soldiers and killed many others, including a commander. Now going to Niger, where at least 20 minor children have died in a fire at a school in a neighborhood of the country's capital. Officials said the fire started around the school gate and trapped the children in straw hut classrooms. They said the school, with around 800 students, didn't have an emergency exit. Officials said the trapped students were forced to scale the walls to escape. Now, in the U.S. state of Minnesota, the Brooklyn Center police chief and the officer who fatally shot a black man have resigned amid civil unrest. This comes after the city council passed a resolution calling for their dismissal. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott said he hopes the move will bring calm to the community. Talking to reporters, Elliott said he is yet to accept the officer's resignation, leaving open the door to firing her. Meanwhile, demonstrators filed in the streets of the suburban city for the third straight night. The victims' relatives and supporters assembled near the Minneapolis courthouse, where Derek Chauvin is standing trial in the George Floyd murder case. Defense for the former police officer began after 11 days of testimonies by prosecution witnesses.
That Derek Chauvin was justified and was acting with objective reasonableness, following Minneapolis Police Department policy and current standards of law enforcement in his interactions with Mr. Floyd.
Now, India has yet again reported the world's highest coronavirus infections, as over 184,000 people tested positive in a day. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while the caseload has crossed 136 million. More about the pandemic in this report.
In a fresh setback to efforts to tackle the pandemic, Johnson & Johnson has delayed its vaccine rollout to Europe after the U.S. paused its use over reports of rare blood clots. U.S. government scientists are focusing on whether the specific technology behind the shots may be contributing to the risk. But President Joe Biden believes the development will negatively impact the vaccine drive.
I made sure we have 600 million doses of the mRNA, not of either Johnson & Johnson and or AstraZeneca. So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American. Thank you.
Meanwhile, in Brazil, a new report says the surging outbreak in the country is increasingly affecting the younger population more. The Brazilian Association of Intensive Medicine says 52% of the ICU beds are filled by patients aged 40 or younger. Over in Europe, the coronavirus situation remains grim as the Dutch government extends most restrictions. The situation in Asia is also worsening by the day. India's third wave keeps bettering the country, as the richest state, Maharashtra, imposed a 15-day lockdown to slow rising infections.
This disease is spreading at a very horrifying pace. I say horrifying because today's number of positive cases in the state is the highest so far. Nearly 60,212 COVID-19 positive cases have been reported in the state today. Hence, the situation is very grim.
Australia's cabinet will begin meeting twice a week, marking a return to war footing amid turmoil in its vaccination drive. However, in more promising news, Moderna's vaccine still showed strong protection against the illness 6 months after people received their second shot.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 135 deaths from COVID-19 overnight, its highest in the third wave. The Health Ministry says the nationwide death toll has reached 15,754.
It said nearly 4,700 people tested positive for the virus over the past 24 hours. The nationwide caseload has reached 734,000, while nearly 642,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are over 75,000 active cases and the positivity ratio stood at 9.73%. Meanwhile, Islamabad says China will be gifting another 500,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine to Pakistan this month. The government has also issued new SOPs for the month of Ramadan, including a broader lockdown. The Ravi prayers are to be organized in open spaces, while outdoor dining has been allowed from iftar till midnight. The authorities say they will review the SOPs on the 10th of Ramadan.
More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has wished the Sikh community a happy Baisakhi festival. In a tweet, he said the government allowed Sikh pilgrims from India to visit the holy sites in Pakistan and to attend the rituals. Khan said the visitors will be facilitated with free food, transport and accommodation. More than 800 pilgrims crossed the Wagah border on Monday to participate in the celebrations. They will be taken to all historical gurdwaras in the country during their 10-day visit. The pilgrims will return to India on the 22nd of this month. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa says Islamabad acknowledges Tokyo's efforts for regional stability. Japan's Ambassador Kuninori Matsuda called on General Bajwa at the military's headquarters in Rawalpindi. The military's media wing said matters of mutual interest and regional security were discussed during the meeting. It said the two also mulled over measures to enhance bilateral cooperation in various fields. General Bajwa said Islamabad values its relations with Japan. Ambassador Matsuda praised Pakistan's role for peace and stability in the region, particularly the Afghan peace process. He pledged to further enhance ties with Pakistan. Pakistan Navy's Nasser ship has returned home after a successful humanitarian assistance and disaster relief mission to African countries. In a tweet, Pakistan Navy's media wing said Nasser delivered 1,000 tons of rice as a gift from people of Pakistan to Djibouti, Sudan, Benin and Niger. It said the ship also visited Port Mombasa in Kenya. It said the dignitaries of the host countries paid special tribute to the Pakistani government and Navy for humanitarian assistance. Now, Sri Lanka has banned 11 Muslim groups a week before the second anniversary of the Easter attacks, which killed 279 people. In a Gazette notification, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said anyone linked to the groups will face up to 20 years in jail. Some of the freshly banned groups had been previously linked to the lead bomber. Earlier, Sri Lanka's Catholics had threatened to take to the streets over the government's inaction against the ones responsible. The 7 who attacked 3 churches and 3 hotels in 2019 had pledged allegiance to ISIS, but investigators say they found no evidence of their direct links to the terror group. Meanwhile, in Egypt, at least 20 people have been killed and 3 others injured in a bus-truck collision in south of the country. Officials say the bus was traveling from Cairo when it was hit by the truck on a road in Asyut Governorate. They added that both vehicles caught fire shortly after the collision. Rescue officials said the victims had been transported to the nearby hospitals. Also, Egypt has filed a compensation claim for $916 million against the Japanese owner of a ship that blocked the Suez Canal for almost a week. UK club The Protection and Indemnity is one of the insurers for the Ever Given ship. In a statement, it said the Canal Authority has not provided a detailed justification for this extraordinarily large claim. It expressed disappointment that the Ever Given vessel and its crew are being held in the canal. Earlier, authorities chairman Osama Rabi said Egypt has officially impounded the megaship as it pursues the compensation claim. He said Ever Given won't be allowed to leave the canal until compensation is settled. Well, now Cuba is set to enter the post-Castro era, with Raul Castro due to step down as a head of the ruling Communist Party. At the 2016 Congress, Castro had said it would be his last one led by what he called a historic generation of revolutionary veterans. Castro, who succeeded his older brother Fidel, will step down at the party's Congress from April 16 to 19. The Castro brothers have successfully reigned over the island country since the 1959 revolution. The Congress takes place every 5 years and is the most important meeting to elect party leadership. Castro is expected to hand over Communist Party's leadership to Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel. But retaining support will be a challenge for Diaz-Canel as he does not have the moral legitimacy of the historic generation. Moving on now, the Venezuelan government says it wants to use frozen funds in the U.S. to pay for the coronavirus vaccines. The funds were frozen by the U.S. Treasury in 2019 as part of the sanctions against President Nicolas Maduro's government. They are currently put under the control of opposition leader Juan Guaido. National Assembly head George Rodriguez said the government will continue to work with the opposition to negotiate this payment. At a news conference, Rodriguez said the kidnapped funds will be used to buy vaccines via global agencies, including the World Health Organization. This is the first time a government official has publicly acknowledged the talks with the opposition. Jennifer Lopez, Selena Gomez and Foo Fighters will star in an online streamed charity concert on 8th of May. Vax Live aims to raise funds for the vaccination of 27 million frontline workers in developing countries. Organized by a non-profit Global Citizen, the event will also feature Eddie Vedder and HER. It will also campaign for fair and equal access to vaccines for all. Chief Executive Hugh Evans says the concert will urge nations to donate excess doses and give financial support to the COVAX facility. He says wealthier nations like the US and the UK have started to stockpile vaccines that exceed their populations. Now, moving on, the La Soferia volcano continued eruption for the 5th day on the eastern Caribbean island of St. Vincent. Officials have warned of water shortages, adding the volcanic activity could continue for months. The latest explosion caused another billowing plume of smoke and ash rock hurtling down the volcano's flanks. Ash blanketed much of the island, destroying crops, contaminating water and devastating infrastructure. Up to 20,000 people have so far been evacuated from the areas near the volcano. Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves said hundreds of millions of dollars are needed to recover from the eruption. Now, buildings around London have been lit up by the board game company Scrabble. It marked the easing of coronavirus-related restrictions in Britain. More details in this report.
The United Kingdom has been one of the worst-hit countries by the coronavirus pandemic. The surge in COVID-19 infections resulted in strict restrictions for months. However, the government has announced to ease lockdown after decrease in countrywide cases. The announcement also coincides with the National Scrabble Day. The board game company Scrabble has decided to mark the occasion in its own way. The company beamed the words like freedom, health, hope, family, and reunion in the style of the game's letter tiles on London's buildings. The company had commissioned a survey to find words that best summed up the mood of the public after months of restrictions.
The most powerful word in there for me is reunion. We've all been apart from each other, friends, loved ones, colleagues who are also loved ones, I suppose, in some cases, and really looking forward to getting back to my friends and family that I haven't seen for a long time, and imagine a lot of the British public are too.
Scrabble said the lockdown had boosted sales of the game in Britain by 51.2% in 2020. The redesigned version of the game, played in more than 120 countries in 33 languages, is being put on sale with the board rebranded from green to blue.
Now, China says it has paid all assessed contributions to the UN regular budget for the year 2021 in full. China's mission to the UN said Beijing timely fulfilled its financial obligations in accordance with the UN Charter. In a statement, the mission said China actively supported the UN and firmly safeguarded the international system. It noted Beijing always remained a builder of world peace and contributed to global development. And the mission added China will continue to honor its responsibilities and firmly support multilateralism. China is the second largest contributor to UN regular budget and peacekeeping assessments. Meanwhile, the Wall Street stocks have risen to record levels as investors digested the first batch of strong corporate earnings. Shares of Goldman Sachs climbed nearly 4% after the banks registered record quarterly profits. The DJI index traded over 0.5% higher, while the indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite also gained fractionally. Oil prices surged after the reduction in U.S. oil inventories and OPEC demand outlook. Meanwhile, cryptocurrency Bitcoin breached the $64,000 level for the first time after its recent record in March. Now in football, Paris Saint-Germain have reached the semi-finals of the Champions League despite a 1-0 home defeat by holders Bayern Munich. PSG progressed on away goals after a 3-3 aggregate result in a thrilling quarter-final second leg.
Eric Choupo-Moting netted the only goal of the match, but it was not enough to undo Bayern's 3-2 defeat in the first leg. The German side has missed out on a Final Four spot only for the second time in the last 11 seasons. PSG will now face either Borussia Dortmund or Manchester City in their Final Four contest. Meanwhile, Chelsea secured a semi-final spot in the competition for the first time in 7 years. The Blues hung on to a 2-1 aggregate win over FC Porto, despite losing 1-0 in the second leg. They will now clash with either Liverpool or Real Madrid in the Final Four.
Now, Italy has given the all-cleared for Stadio Olimpico in Rome to host at least 25% capacity at the Euro 2020. Rome's Olympic Stadium is due to host the opening match, Italy versus Turkey, on the 11th of June, and 3 other games. UEFA had asked the 12 host nations to submit their plans for allowing fans inside stadiums by early April. Euro 2020 was postponed by a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in the National Basketball Association, Jason Tatum's stellar performance has helped the Boston Celtics narrowly edge the host Portland Trail Blazers 116 to 115 points. Tatum recorded 32 points, 9 rebounds and 5 assists to hand Boston their 4th consecutive win. Jaylen Brown scored 24 points, while Kemba Walker contributed 21 points for Boston. Meanwhile, Brooklyn Nets comfortably beat the host Minnesota Timberwolves 127 to 97 points. Kevin Durant scored 31 points for Brooklyn, who snapped their 5-game losing streak at Minnesota. In other fixtures, Los Angeles Lakers bested Charlotte Hornets 101 to 93 points. Meanwhile, Atlanta Hawks defeated Toronto Raptors 108 to 103. And with that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.